All right, macroeconomics folks, what we have here are 40 terms from the principles of macroeconomics, from a basic introductory understanding of macroeconomics. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and define these words the way I think of them and the way I think that you should understand them. Okay, there's nothing, I'm not going to give Webster's definitions. We're just going to give you some explanations to help you prepare for the exam that you're going to take. Okay, so let's start over here. You can see over here I sort of started running out of room, so the font got a little bit smaller. But let's start over here with benefit. A benefit is some sort of positive quality or a positive consequence that comes out of choosing a course of action. Okay, that's what a benefit is. Every decision we make has benefits. Also, every decision that we make has costs associated with it. So the benefits are the positive things that come out of the decisions that we make. The costs are the negative things that come out of the decisions that we make. The costs are whatever we have to give up or lose in order to enact a decision. Okay? Now, utility is the overall satisfaction that a person experiences when they enact a decision, when they make a decision, or when they consume something. So utility is generally the idea of the amount of utility that a person experiences is basically the benefits minus the costs. And so you can actually experience negative utility if your costs are greater than your benefits. Okay, so utility is the overall satisfaction that you get from making a decision, and it's the basic idea is it's the net value of the benefits minus the costs. An opportunity cost is, at least in economics, is a very specific kind of cost. The opportunity cost of a decision is the value of the next best alternative that you would choose if you didn't choose the thing that you did choose. So, for example, if I was going to pick, if there were two restaurants I really wanted to eat at, let's say that I wanted to go to Outback, but I also wanted to go to Chili's, and I picked Outback because I thought that was going to be better than Chili's. But if I didn't pick Outback, then I would have picked Chili's. So I have to give up going to Chili's in order to go to Outback. I don't get Chili's because I do get Outback. Therefore, Chili's, the not eating at Chili's, that's my opportunity cost for eating at Outback. Okay? So opportunity cost is the cost of the next best alternative. Now, the law of diminishing benefit says that because every action we take has some benefits to it, the law of diminishing benefit says that, well, if doing something is beneficial, then why not do it again? Doing it once is great, so doing it twice should be awesome also, right? Choosing it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Well, the law of diminishing benefit says that the more you make the same decision or the more you enact the same action, the benefits eventually get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller each time you enact the benefit. However, the law of increasing opportunity cost says that the more you enact the same action or the same division, that opportunity cost, it's going to become larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. So generally, the law of diminishing benefit says that benefits tend to decrease the more you do something, and costs, the law of increasing opportunity cost, says that costs tend to increase the more that you do something, the more that you do the same thing, okay? So in economics, in macroeconomics, one of the biggest things that we're concerned about is the idea of producing stuff, okay? So we like to produce markers, we like to produce ties, we like to produce name tags and glasses and phones and whiteboards and clocks. We like to produce lots of stuff. And in order to produce stuff, we make the stuff out of other stuff, okay? And so the stuff that we make stuff out of, those are called factors of production. So a factor of production is a resource that is used to produce goods and services, okay? And now, we have 4 factors of production here that we primarily look at. Land is just natural resources. So trees, rocks, water, air, all of those things, we consider those land. Land are the natural resources that we use to produce goods and services. Labor is the people resources that are used to produce goods and services. And capital is anything, any produced good that was made out of land and labor. So like a hammer was made out of raw materials, land, and a person put in effort to take that raw material and turn it into a hammer. And the result of land and labor is now capital. And capital is a produced resource that is then used to produce more resources. Okay? Entrepreneurship is the creative force that brings together land, labor, and capital to produce goods and services to sell or use or whatnot. Okay, so here's the creative energy. This is produced materials that are used for producing more materials. Land is natural resources, and labor is the people and their effort and their time and their skill and their knowledge. Okay, that's labor. Now I just kind of threw liquidity in here because I didn't know where to put it in the whole thing, but I want to remind you that liquidity has to do with money, with the medium of exchange in an economy. Okay, so most economies have money, currency or electronic money, as a medium of exchange. And remember that money is a medium of exchange. It makes it easier for people to sell things and then later on go buy things, and the same person doesn't have, you don't have to trade. I can trade my skill as a teacher for money. Then once I get the money, I can go buy a car, or I can buy a meal or something like that. Okay, so here's liquidity. Liquidity is the ease with which an asset, like how easily can I turn this marker into cash? Probably not that easily, because other people can sell markers for a better price than I can. But how easily could I turn, let's say, my car into cash? Well, there's probably a lot of people out there. There's a good market for cars, so I could probably turn my car into cash a little easier than turning this marker into cash. Although eBay makes liquidity a lot easier. Now that we have eBay, I can post almost anything on the internet and ask somebody to buy it from me, and someone is, for the right price, will probably buy it. So eBay has made liquidity a lot better. Liquidity, again, is how easy is it to turn stuff into money. And some things are easier to sell, to turn into money, than other things are. Okay? So that's the liquidity of an asset. So once we produce stuff, we then want to sell that stuff. And that's where supply and demand come in. So supply is the seller's side of the market. The sellers produce stuff out of the factors of production. And then demand, those are all the people that want to buy that stuff. Those are the people that want to go to the store with their money and they want to buy the stuff that was produced by sellers using the factors of production. Now, supply is the willingness and ability of sellers to produce and sell a product. Okay, so it's the willingness and ability to sell, where demand is the willingness and ability to buy. Somebody has to be willing to buy what you're selling, and they have to be able to buy it. So somebody might say, sure, I'll buy your car from you, but they don't have any money. So if they desire to buy a car, but they don't have the money to buy a car, they are not demanders, because even though they're willing, they are not able. A person has to have the ability to buy, and they have to have the willingness to buy. Somebody may have $1 million, but they do not want my marker. Therefore, they are not a demander of markers. Okay? So that's supply and demand. So in our economy, we care very much about production. We care very much about how well things are being produced and how successful we are at producing and how much we produce. In our economy, in our country, we want to produce more and more and more and more. Why do we want to produce more and more and more? Because when we produce more, it basically means that we get more utility, more benefit, and in some cases, fewer costs. So the more prosperous our economy is, the more benefits and the more utility that we can experience as citizens of this country. So we care about three very important things. We care about the economic growth of our country, and because we have to buy things, we care very much about the price level, meaning that we want a stable price level, and we care that people are able to get out there and work, so we care about what's called full employment. Economic growth is the steady and systematic increase of production over time in an economy. We don't want to just keep producing the same things with the factors of production. We want to produce more next year than we produced this year. And the year after that, we want to produce even more. So economic growth is a steady and systematic increase of production of goods and services in an economy. Okay, so price level has to do with the money in the economy, with the medium of exchange. Price level is concerned with, comparatively, as time goes by, how much money is required to get stuff. How much money is required to get a loaf of bread? Or how much money is required to get a gallon of gas? Over time, the prices of things go up, and the price level is the comparative amount of money that's necessary from one year to the next to buy the same stuff. So a price level that is stable allows you to buy things, the same stuff next year that you bought this year with the same amount of money. And so price level is very important because we want the amount of money that we spend this year to be very similar to the amount of money that we can spend next year. But if prices go up too fast, then I won't be able to buy as much stuff next year that I bought this year. So over time, I will actually have less and less benefit because I'm buying less and less stuff because the price level is increasing too fast. The comparison of money needed to buy stuff is going up, 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 up too fast for the money that I have. Okay? So that's the price level. Full employment is utilization of labor in an economy. We have a certain amount of labor in the economy, a certain number of people, and we want all the people who are working to be working. Full employment is the level of employment in an economy where everybody who wants to be working is working. I'll go one step further. I'm going to get a little more technical on this definition. You can think back to the notes. Full employment is a situation in an economy where the only people who are out of work either want to be out of work or they are on their way to another job that is waiting for them. That's full employment. I'm going to go one step further on full employment, a little more technical. Full employment is a situation where the number of people who are unemployed is equal to the number of jobs available in the economy. All right, so those are three different definitions of full employment. Now, full employment has to do with the subject of unemployment. Unemployment is the idea that there are people who want to be working but are not working. So the more people that are not working but want to be working, that's a higher level of unemployment. But when there aren't very many people not working but they want to be working, that's a low level of unemployment. And there's three basic kinds of unemployment. We have cyclical unemployment, frictional unemployment, and structural unemployment. Now, frictional unemployment is unemployment in where the reason a person is unemployed is because they are moving from one job over to another job. Frictional unemployment. A person is frictionally unemployed if they are simply moving from one job over to another job. So they quit their job, and in 2 weeks, they're going to be working at another job. But for that 2 weeks, they're out of work. That's frictional unemployment. Structural unemployment is unemployment where the person doesn't have, there's a person available to work a job and there's a job available. So I say, I would like to work for you. And the employer says, I would like for you to work for me. I have a job available. I would like for you to work here. But do you know how to do this? Do you know how to hammer a nail? Oh, no, I don't know how to hammer a nail. Oh, well, then I can't hire you yet because you don't know how to hammer a nail. And this job is a job where somebody has to hammer nails. So structural unemployment is a situation where there are people who don't have jobs and there's jobs available for them, but they don't have all the right skills for these jobs, and therefore they have to go get the skills. While they're getting the skills, they're not employed, but the jobs are still available for them. So structural unemployment is a situation where the unemployed people don't have the correct skills for the jobs that are available. So when you think of frictional unemployment and structural unemployment, those are the good unemployments, okay? When you combine those together, if all of the people in the United States are frictionally or structurally unemployed, then we are at full employment, okay? But cyclical unemployment is a problem. Cyclical unemployment is bad unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is unemployment that occurs because of a recessionary gap. Because production is low in the economy, because we're producing less than we could be producing, there are people out of work, and that is cyclical unemployment. Now, we don't want people to be out of work. We want people to be employed, and we want the price level to be stable, and we want economic growth. Well, how do we measure economic growth? Remember how I said economic growth is the systematic increase of production over time? Well, we have a way of measuring the production in the economy, and that's called GDP, gross domestic product. But when we try to measure GDP, the way we measure GDP is by adding up all the money that was spent on the stuff that we produced. The problem is that when we add up all the money that was spent on the stuff that was produced, that money that we're adding up includes the price of the product, and the price changes over time. And so when we just add up how much money was spent in the economy, that's called nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is all the money that was spent on stuff in the economy. So what we want to do is we don't want the money with the production, we just want the production. So if we divide out and remove the price of the product from nominal GDP, I mean, that's a rough term, but basically what we're doing is we're dividing out price changes because prices go up over time, inflation. So when we divide inflation out of nominal GDP, when we divide price changes out of GDP, all we have left are changes in actual production, and that gives us real GDP. So real GDP is a measure of the actual production of stuff and not a measure of changes in price. All right, that's real GDP. Now, because real GDP is the stuff that's produced in the economy, it's a measure of the stuff produced in the goods and services produced in an economy. What do we make the goods and services out of? We make them out of factors of production, land, labor, and capital, and entrepreneurship. In the economy, there is an ideal level of production that we can achieve based on our stock of factors, based on how much land, how much labor, how much capital, and how much entrepreneurship we have an amount of stuff that we can produce. That is called natural real GDP. And natural real GDP is the ideal level of production. Natural real GDP only goes up if we get more resources. Now, our actual production is not always equal to our possible production. And that's where recessions come in and where inflationary gaps come in. Now, in order to measure GDP in the economy, we have a way of measuring it. Remember how we said nominal GDP is all the money spent in the economy on stuff that we've produced? Well, the way that we measure this nominal GDP is with a concept called, or with a measure called total expenditure. That's total, all of expenditure, money that was spent. So total expenditure is all the money spent in the economy on stuff, on goods and services. And we break total expenditure up into 4 categories: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Consumption is all the money spent on goods and services in an economy by households, by individuals, by people, just people. The families, the individuals in the families, the households. Consumers are people who are not doing business. Why are consumers spending money? Because they want to consume stuff and experience the benefits of it. Even though there are costs, they want to get utility. All right, so consumption, all the money spent on goods and services that are produced, all the money spent by households and individuals. Investment is all the money spent on stuff, all the stuff purchased by businesses for the purpose of doing business and producing other stuff. Government spending is all the money spent on goods and services produced in this country by the government. The stuff wasn't produced by the government, the stuff was produced by businesses. But government spending is all the money that the government spends on buying that stuff. Okay, that's government spending. Net exports is all the money spent by people in other countries on the stuff that we produce in this country. Okay, so there's 4 groups of people that can buy the stuff that we produce. We make stuff. Suppliers, sellers make stuff out of the factors of production. So they produce cars and gasoline and food and chairs and tables and phones and TVs and movies. And there's 4 groups that can buy that stuff: households, businesses, the government, and households, businesses, and governments in other countries. And so when you add up those 4 categories, when you add up all the money spent in other countries on our stuff, by the government on our stuff, by businesses on our stuff, and by households on our stuff, that gives you total expenditure. Total expenditure is the total amount of money spent on all the stuff that we produced in this country. Okay? All right. Now, we produce stuff, right? But sometimes, some years, we produce production is really, really good. We produce more and more and more stuff in a really fast way. But some years, our production slows down a little bit and we don't produce as much stuff than we did maybe the year before. Or we produce more, but not much more. Our growth is very small. Some years our growth is big, and some years our growth is small when we produce stuff in the economy. The fact that there's fluctuations over time in how much we produce, that's called the business cycle. The business cycle is the the phenomenon over time that shows that sometimes we produce a lot more and sometimes we only produce a little more. And so the business cycle shows the fluctuations in the production in an economy. Okay? And because our production fluctuates in the economy, some years we produce, remember how I said that this is our actual production, real GDP, and natural real GDP is how much we could be producing. This is the ideal level of production. Well, in some years we produce more than we should. We have really good year, really high production. Real GDP is really, really high, but it's too high. It's higher than what we should be producing. When that happens, we are in an inflationary gap. But some years we produce, our actual production is less than how much we could be producing. We produce less, we underproduce. We use fewer resources than we have available to us, and we produce less than we could. When that happens, we're in a recessionary gap. So a recessionary gap is a situation where real GDP, actual production, is less than the ideal level of production or the capacity level of production in an economy. But an inflationary gap is a situation where actual production in the economy is higher than the ideal level of production, or higher than the capacity level. We're producing over capacity in an inflationary gap. And because we experience this business cycle, we have these ups and downs of production over time in the economy. So sometimes in a recessionary gap, people are kind of depressed, right? In a recessionary gap, people there's a lot of unemployment and low production. People have less utility because they're experiencing fewer benefits and sometimes more costs. And in an inflationary gap, that's dangerous for the economy because we could burn out our resources. We can hurt our factors of production by overusing them in an inflationary gap. And therefore, what our government often does is does all the time, our government has decided that they will manage the economy. They will manage this business cycle. When things are really low, they'll try and speed things up to increase production. Or when we're in an inflationary gap and production is too high, they'll try and stifle it and try and bring it down a little bit. When the government intervenes in the economy to manage the business cycle with their recessionary gaps and inflationary gaps, we call that fiscal policy and monetary policy. It's called economic policy. Now, fiscal policy is where the federal government, through Congress, intervenes in managing the business cycle in the economy. That's fiscal policy. That's Congress getting involved through, how do they do it? Congress intervenes through two main things, through how they set their taxes and how they decide on their spending. So Congress makes decisions about government spending and taxes with the sole purpose, or the main purpose, of trying to affect the business cycle. And there's two possibilities. Sometimes the government, through fiscal policy, will increase government spending, but they'll decrease taxes. And when spending goes up and taxes come down, we are spending more money than we're earning as a government. So we are in a deficit. That's called a budget deficit. A budget deficit is where government spending is higher than the tax revenues that are received to run the government. The other possibility is through fiscal policy, Congress could decrease spending and increase taxes. When they do that, tax income is higher than the spending of the government, and we have a budget surplus. So a budget surplus is where tax income, federal tax income is higher, or government tax income is higher than government spending, and there's money left over. Okay, so that's a budget surplus. We're almost done here. Monetary policy. Now that's when the government intervenes in managing the economy through adjusting the money supply. Monetary policy is when the government adjusts the money supply. They either increase the money supply or they decrease the money supply. Why are they increasing or decreasing the money supply? Because they want to affect the business cycle. They either want to speed things up in a recessionary gap, or they want to slow things down in an inflationary gap. Okay? Now one of the main reasons why monetary policy works is because in our economy, we have a banking system. And in the banking system, you go to a bank and you deposit your money. You're a depositor, or you borrow money from the bank. So you deposit money and you borrow money from the bank. Businesses deposit money and borrow money from the bank. Our banks in this country are allowed to loan out most of the money that is deposited. They are allowed to loan out a fraction of the money that is deposited, and that is called a fractional reserve banking system. Fractional reserve banking is a banking system where banks only have to keep a fraction of the deposits that people have made as a reserve for depositors who may want to come back and get some of their money back. Okay, so in our country, banks are allowed to loan out most of the money, and they only have to keep a little bit of their money, just in case depositors want some of their money back. That's a fractional reserve banking system. Because of the fractional reserve banking system, we're able to multiply money that's put into the economy. And so when some money is put in the economy, the banks, through loaning out over and over and over, because there's lots and lots of banks. One bank loans out to a person, that person spends it, that person who received the cash puts it in their bank, that bank loans that money out, the person spends it. It's a chain reaction of spending and lending. Okay, so this chain reaction of spending and lending through the fractional reserve banking system allows the money supply to swell and get really large. And so through monetary policy, the government wants to manage the money supply, and a big part of managing the money supply is this fractional reserve banking. Now, there's three main tools that the federal government, that the Federal Reserve System in the U.S. economy. So we have a central bank. It's called the Federal Reserve System. Sometimes we basically call it, its nickname is the Fed, but it's our central bank. And our central bank has three main tools to manage the money supply through monetary policy. One of those tools is open market operations. One of those tools is the reserve requirement, which affects it's related to the fractional reserve banking system. And the third one is the discount rate. So the reserve requirement is simply the amount of money that banks have to keep in their possession in case depositors want to come back and get that money. Okay, so it's the small amount of money, the small amount of deposits that banks have to keep on hand and not loan out. The discount rate, that's the interest rate that the Federal Reserve charges banks to borrow money. And why would banks want to borrow money from the Fed? Well, so they can loan it out. And so the central bank, through monetary policy, might increase or decrease the discount rate, the interest rate that they charge banks, so that to either encourage banks to lend out or to discourage banks from lending out. Okay? Open market operations, that's the day-to-day of through monetary policy, this is the day-to-day activities of the central bank to make minor adjustments to the money supply. They buy and sell government securities to make minor adjustments to increase or decrease the money supply in the economy. And they do that through open market operations. Just about done. Just the last one. What is interest? Well, interest is, I mentioned before, the discount rate is the interest rate that the Federal Reserve or that the central bank charges banks to borrow money. Well, what is interest? Interest, very simply, is the price of money. Okay, interest is how much money that people pay banks to borrow money. I don't have $10,000. I would like to have $10,000. So I go to a bank and I say, hey, would you give me $10,000 because you have $10,000? And they say, sure, we will give you $10,000, but you have to give us back $10,500. So the extra $500, that's the price of borrowing the $10,000. That's the interest. I have to pay $500 in interest. In that particular case, that's a simple 5% interest on the $10,000. Interest is the price of borrowing money. It's the money paid for borrowing money. All right. Well, there you go. Those are your 40 words. I think that if you watch this, maybe in fast forward or something like that, you can probably get through it pretty quick. It's about 35 minutes long, but these are all the words that you have to match on your final exam. And I hope that this helped out a bit. Okay. Good luck and have a great day.